Perfect. Thank you all for joining us today to this edition of MIT Mondays. I'm Denzil, Streete Senior Associate Dean and Director of Graduate Education here at MIT. And today we're joined by Xavier Smith, one of our EECS doctoral students. And this is meant to be a conversation. And so, Xavier, welcome to MIT Mondays. And I know you're going to have some beauties to lend to our attendees and to those who may be watching this recording. So Xavier, can you start first by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about your background, where you're from, where did you study, and what did you study as an undergraduate? Just a real introduction to who you are.
Yeah. My name is Xavier Smith. I did my undergrad at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I did computer engineering there. I was part of the Meyerhoff program and the UIs program, if anyone knows what that is. I am a second year electrical engineering PhD student in Polina Anakiva's lab doing bioelectronic research. Um, feel like there's something else I missed. Oh, hometown. I'm from Maryland, from Laurel, Maryland, PG County. If anybody knows where that is, yeah, pretty much it. You're muted actually.
Sorry. You talked about the fact that, so let me back up a bit. The purpose of MIT Mondays is to really give our attendees and prospective students a real inside view of how do you get from where they are currently to being an MIT student, right? So that
Mhm.
it's meant to be motivational, I guess, but also just educational, informational about how do I get from being where I am as an undergraduate student to being a doctoral student at one of the top institutions in the world, right? So you
Mhm.
spoke a bit about being at UMBC and um, participation in Meyerhoff and URISE. Talk to us a bit about why those types of programs. First of all, what were those types of programs and why programs like those were beneficial to your success as a graduate student?
Yeah. So at least I give a little bit of the history at least. So Meyerhoff was created, forget the year, but almost a little over 30 years ago to get Black and brown students to higher to terminal degrees essentially. So it's kind of formed so that people that look like me are able to get access to higher education outside of beyond undergrad. And the program evolved over those 30 years towards being a undergraduate pipeline program essentially to getting students to getting them exposure to um, research level or graduate level research experiences, whether it be in RUs or research experiences over the summer, having them get practice with like scientific writing, whether, throughout their years in their undergrad, being in sustained labs and developing a relationship with their PI, their mentor in the lab, really just helping them to become a graduate, getting the mindset of becoming a graduate student before they're actually in graduate school. So when they apply, they're ready to get there. But the majority of the program is focused on getting people exposure. I think that's the main thing. And then that exposure then helps them to form their mindset towards saying, okay, well, if I want to do this research in this specific field, kind of gives them the more of the soft skills, I would say, that are important to help them to succeed. And then more of the more tangible skills, whether, depending upon the field that they're in, um, will be kind of formed in their classes. And then they have like peer mentors set up there that are people in their majors to help them with the more technical aspects of it. So
Perfect. So you're in these programs benefiting from all of the sort of professional development required to make you, one, seriously consider a PhD, but also give you the practical tools to get there. Talk to us a bit about applying to PhD programs. How did you determine which PhD programs you would apply to? Were there any particular things that sort of prepared you for the application process? So talk to us about the application process. How did you go about getting the experience to be competitive, but also how did you go about selecting programs?
Yeah, I'd say, all right, so the application process, I guess, was a year-long kind of thing. The first, it's kind of just broken into two sections. The first part is the actual like writing applications part, but in reality, the application part starts as soon as you start your first research experience. So you kind of have to, that's, I guess, highlighting going back to the programs that I was in, they had the end in mind. I guess that's kind of like the theme of the program in the first place. So whatever research experience and the thing that you might have an idea of what you want to do in graduate school before, the experiences before help you to then write the applications or help you to kind of craft the application that you would then submit in the first half of the year. And so the application process would be mainly just reflecting on the past few years if you've done research in those times to kind of describe the story of why you did research in those areas, what you're interested in, and why you believe that you might be a good graduate student or a successful graduate student in that lab, and why also you're interested in the research that you're doing. So the first half of it is really just is communicating. So some of the biggest things are answering the question. Reality is a lot of when people are reading the applications, it's important that they kind of get their answers that they need. As they're reading a ton of applications. So, but the ones that stand out are the ones that are able to accurately address the question that they're asking. Um, and if they're able to see that they can, again, communicate some of the past experience that they've had, or if they've had no research experience, communicating as to why they might want to do research in that area. Um, and mixed with that, some programs have interviews. So that's another big part of it. So also being prepared for like navigating I want to say interview space, but really just navigating, I guess, answering the questions, being prepared to be asked questions that they may not, that, relative to the field that they want to get into. If that makes sense. So at least for me, I was applying to all electrical engineering programs, so most majority of them did not have interviews. Only one of them did, and it was more of a paper process. So that made my life a little easier, at least. But it is fun to travel between if you're interviewing in person, at least. So.
Perfect. So I want to take one step back and then we'll have one step forward. You talked about research experiences.
Mhm.
Beyond those at UMBC, so as part of your undergraduate career, at your undergraduate institution, what are the research experiences that you have?
So I had two. I did one at MIT Summer Research Program at MSRP. It's a pretty famous RU program that has about 90 to 100 students about a year at this point. Getting people just immersed in the research experiences at being an institution like MIT, and majority of the students are minorities. Again, to kind of get students that look like me into the fields that kind of just like diversify the field and also give them experiences and the opportunity to be able to do research. So that's what I did in 2021. I did research in power electronics, and then in 2022, I did a research experience at UC Berkeley in the Amgen Scholars Program. So I was doing it in like it was a microbiology like program. But I was in an intersection between electrical engineering and applied like neuromodulation and chemistry. So it was actually pretty cool. And yeah, I think that was those are two question, right? Okay.
Perfect. So you had both the professional development on your campus, you did some summer research experiences, and now you're here at MIT. Talk to us a bit about how you went about selecting the institution. I'm assuming you would have been admitted to multiple institutions. Talk to us a bit about how you went around selecting the institution you would attend, and then a little bit about why MIT.
Yeah, and okay, so I applied to, all right, well, okay, I'll back up a little bit. So the program that I was in, well, the two programs that are in there kind of had like a standard that applied to a ton of programs, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I realized that applying to graduate schools, it's time intensive and financially intensive at least, because sometimes the application, so I only ended up applying to seven total. Um, so I did. Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, three MIT programs, Stanford, Berkeley, Rice, and Caltech. So I think it ends up being seven. Yeah. So um, and I chose MIT because, well, first I got into four of seven. So I got into one MIT program, and every other program except for Caltech. Um, but I chose MIT specifically because of the research. So that was the kind of the thing that my program instilled inside of us, mentally at least, was choosing your advisor, and the research is like almost like a marriage in a way. Like you have to like spend a lot of time to understand the person that you're going to be with for the next 5 to 6 years. And the research that you're doing is a huge part of that, right? The lab culture, and that's like your number one. So all the other things in terms of like the weather, the place that you want to be at, right? Like the city that you might want to be, the institution that might be favored for other reasons. My research was number one. So I actually ended up happening to meet my advisor, my current advisor in MSRP 2021, um, and ended up just like kind of reading up on some of the stuff that she was doing. And I thought that that was interesting enough for me to say, okay, I want to apply to see what it's like to be a graduate student in her lab. The more that I talked to her, the more that I realized that I actually wanted to be in her lab because of her approach on science, not necessarily because of the research she was doing, but her mindset. And I think that really impacted me a bit more than others that I interviewed with other places, enough for me to say, okay, I want to go here because I think she's going to support me in whatever I might do. Because research directions change, right? More of it, the important part is that the skills that you get from being a researcher. And I think that she fit that bill for me. So,
And just because you brought it up, what are some of those skills you think that are critical in being a researcher?
um, I mean, to sum it up, it would be to be able to identify and solve a problem. I think that's what the PhD is really about. Not saying that when you don't do a PhD, you can't do that, but the PhD is more of like a bubble for you to do that. In a way, where you're able to have access in that bubble, you have access to resources that you may not normally have access to. A good example is like MIT has a ton of maker spaces, and I guess this might one of the things it might be known for is like they have a lot of makerspace, a lot of free things for students to use. That might be hundreds of thousands of dollars of limited access in other not only at other universities, but other places outside of universities. And so being able to identify and solve some of the more challenging problems sometimes limited by resources, right? So um, and I think because MIT is specifically is like a place where it's like, okay, we're going to give you the resources so that you can solve the problems, and we're not going to stop you from doing that. It becomes, in general, as a PhD student, important for you to be able to say, okay, I'm going to, again, see a problem and do my best to tackle that problem. Because when you graduate and you go out into the world, you've had experience of, having the resources to be able to tackle that hard problem, and also you have the time and the like that background to be able to do that. So
Perfect. So you've led us all the way to being a student here at MIT. Talk to us a bit about your research. Like, what are you actually seeking to solve or resolve, and what keeps you excited about that research?
yeah. So I mentioned before, like my lab, we are like the bioelectronics lab at MIT. We work on developing devices to interface with the brain and the body to learn more about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases and psychiatric disorders. Um, so our lab focuses on doing things like couple of things we do are like we do flexible electronics and optical fibers for neuromodulation, for photometry, and other like investigating like neuro behavior in vivo and in vitro. We developed transducers to be able to kind of see inside the brain, essentially, quote unquote, to investigate some of those mechanisms. My research, what I'm working on right now, is I'm working on a device called magnetic particle imaging, where it's essentially a minimally to non-invasive contrast imaging modality, similar to MRI, where we use magnetic nanoparticles to create contrast images inside of human tissue. So my first project is kind of innovating that device, and kind of pushing the intellectual boundaries there. Um, And I think you had another part of the question.
Like what excites you about that?
Right, what excites me? Yeah. So I think what excites me is the end in mind, I guess. And I say that because it's similar to the programs, my programs like perspective, but I know when I graduate, I want to start a company and I want to be able to build stuff that's useful to people like today. Today meaning at least in my lifetime. So I'm working on things that I know would potentially have the opportunity to be applied in, let's say, hospitals or let's say in like in a clinical sense. So that's what excites me. I'm like, okay, I know I kind of do my research and I approach it that way. I'm like, okay, I may want to develop some device to image inside of the brain, maybe that has like maybe higher contrast or higher spatial temporal resolution or get essentially better images than MRI. Well, okay, I think this device is interesting enough for me to do like delve deeper essentially. So that's kind of like my as to what excites me.
Perfect. And we'll come back to that entrepreneurship in a second. So, you know, you've painted a great picture of how you were prepared for PhD, the things that attracted you to MIT, the great research that you get to be exposed to and be involved with. But I would assume that there were a lot of obstacles along the way, or even current challenges that you face, right? So talk to us a bit about, you know, some of the challenges you face as a graduate student now. Um, like what are the things that you weren't prepared for, that are surprising, that maybe sort of just daily challenges? Talk to us a bit about that so we can paint an accurate picture of
Mm.
what the PhD
Yeah.
is.
I'd say my at least my biggest challenges have been like classes. I would say uh the structure of being at MIT in terms of like academically is just more rigorous than it is at most places for I mean for good reason at least. And I saw that before and it's more of a kind of trial by fire kind of thing I realized when I got here. And so MIT has this like idea of the idea that's said that when you start classes here it's like drinking from a fire hose and that ends up being true because a lot of information is thrown at you and so you kind of have to move your standard of excellence up to MIT's level to be able to stay consistent with the flow of the group, whether it be in your class or research and whatnot. And so that's been the biggest challenge for me because I've hit the ground running when it comes to research, but then classes have been lagging a little behind because of whether it be the intensity or just learning how to manage both of them as a graduate student has been a challenge. And then yeah, I think that's it. That probably because your work-life balance and like the balancing everything has to be well, it's like a learned skill essentially. Like new challenges, you have to kind of like learn what's good for you. And I think that's been a bit of a challenge. But yeah.
And so how are you navigating that challenge? Like what are the tools and or people you're leveraging to sort of come around in terms of the performance in the classroom?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd say right now what I'm doing is this past I guess so I've been here for about well, let's see, I've been here for about almost 2 years. Like 2 calendar years at least. So I know when I first got here, I'd say my study and sleep schedule probably wasn't the best. I learned from some of like either whether it be my classmates or professors, like when I ask for help of like how to like reorganize, just like restructure myself in terms of academically and it's like time management wise. I think that's one way that I've been navigating that and just kind of getting advice from my advisor. My advisor, she's in my field, but in terms of being like, she's the department head of material science, right? So she's not in electrical engineering necessarily. So she's there to kind of give me guidance in terms of like, okay, what do I do in this situation where I may have a lot on my plate this semester? Like, how do you think I should manage X, Y, Z? So I think going to getting advice and actually implementing what I hear has been useful enough for me to say, okay, came from a place where I'm like, oh, I wasn't sure academically how I was going to be doing up to a point where I feel like I'm confident enough to give somebody else advice because I'm actually implementing what I've learned for myself.
Nice.
So,
Great. What are some, so I know, so this is a two-part question. you talked about entrepreneurship. You may potentially want to own your own company. Um, so the first part of the question, are there resources that you're tapping into now to prepare you for that future trajectory? That's one. And then two, talk to us a bit about some of the on-campus resources that you sort of leverage to help you navigate, whether it's classes, your research, your own personal well-being.
Right. I'd say, well, so the first part of your question is I don't know what it is I want to do at the moment. Because I'm still a little early in my PhD at least. So the thesis is still like getting crafted at the moment. So and I feel like that's more of a game time decision once I get a few more papers out. Um, let's see. In terms of resources, at least at MIT, there's like like a literal ton. Like there's MIT Delta V, which is an entrepreneurship. It's people from my lab that actually ended up doing that to do their startup. It's a MIT Delta V is it's a summer program, I believe. They give you money, and then you're able to then they give you some like yeah, they give you some funding, and they give you some I think people to work with you from different universities, maybe Harvard Business School, I believe, that kind of helps you grow your company. There's the MIT Sandbox, the Engine, a few others that are there to help you kind of take your idea and actually bring it to fruition. So I know there's a lot of them, and I probably haven't even touched on a good half of them. So those are just the ones that I know off the top of my head.
Perfect. This one is a little bit of a philosophical question. What have you learned about yourself so far in graduate school?
Uh, what have I learned about myself? Well, I'd say I've learned, it's a good question. Uh, well, I say I've learned that I am a person that likes to I like to do everything. Um, I think this kind of goes back to that part, like academically at least. I'm a person that likes to kind of do everything, and I do because that's kind of how like my undergrad was. And in undergrad, at least, like there was a lot of stuff going on. I was like president of IEEE. I was in like those two programs. I was doing research at my university and taking like 5 classes and stuff like that. So like my nature is to do a lot, but then here at graduate school, quality over quantity happens to be the thing that I learned. So I learned about myself that I'm like I want to do a lot, but I may not be able to do everything. And not do maybe I may not be able to do everything well. Um, so I think I've learned about myself that I need to simplify my life in terms of the things that I do and spend time working on whatever it is or minimize the amount of things that I'm doing in a certain period in my life, which those periods are determined by the semesters, at least for right now, right? So whether it be like one research thing or a couple research things for the semester, like a handful of classes, and that's it. Um, so I think that's what I've learned from myself, that I want to do everything, but it's important that I learn how to do a limited amount of things and do that well. So
Perfect. Um, so as we think about keeping our audience in mind, knowing what you know now, what are a couple of pieces of advice you'd want to give to someone thinking about pursuing a PhD?
okay, that's a broad question. But I will say, I guess give some like just general advice. Well, if you're gonna do a PhD at least, I think that it would probably be best that you enjoy what you like the research that you do. The reality is that there are other places you could do similar types of research, and so you kind of have to highlight as to why a PhD probably is attractive to you because it does get difficult and it is easy for you to, at least for me. So I give an example, like at least for me, like I see my friends, they are whether or not they're doing research or they're working on stuff that's cool, and then the whether it be like the lifestyle difference because again you're still be in school, you're still doing classes and whatnot um you have to compare those things before you jump into a PhD. So it's important to be able to do things like where you're gonna live, like the money, the lifestyle, that kind of thing. if that would be my first piece of advice, because again, it does get difficult, and sometimes like relationships change. So again, like I mentioned before, like your advisor is your life essentially. Like that determines your life as a PhD student. Things change in their lives, which can change yours, right? So you have to kind of know why you're there, and you're there for what you love to do. That would be my probably my biggest piece of advice. Because again, I've seen people like join labs and leave. I've seen people join and master out. I've seen people go through, stay for 10 years. Obviously, I haven't been here for 10 years, at least I've heard of it. Um, but the point is like things change. If you know why you're here, you'll be able to kind of sustain through the bumps and whatnot. So
Perfect. Any practical tips on applying to graduate school you'd want to give our attendees?
start early, get people to read your stuff early, but answer the question holistically. Don't try to pull more out of what you pull, like kind of like pull more out of your experiences than what's actually there, because that's pretty easy for reviewers to see. Again, I've seen people get in graduate school that have had no research experience. So I know sometimes it happens to be like, oh, I don't have any research experience. I probably either shouldn't apply, or I should try to maybe act like this is more than what it might have been. What matters is communicating why you want to do research, why you're interested in some of the skills that you feel like would be useful. And that's one piece of advice. Another piece of advice would be to email people that you're interested in, and talk to them. I think that really does a huge, huge amount. At least I know for myself, like that helped me and it helped a lot of my friends. Emailing the professor, asking them to see what they're doing, where are there any openings, that kind of getting that information as you're applying, to help you to make those decisions. It's not like it's like a secret or anything like that. It's more of a the more you know, the more you know about what you're doing, like kind of the better, and the people that you know also helps. So
Perfect. And my final question before we take some questions from the audience is, what inspires you to keep going, even when things get tough in your research or being a student?
well, I think I'd say um the thing that keeps me going probably is my just desire to help people in general. Like I think it's kind of like that saying, or like the idea of, if anything that's worth having, it obviously isn't easy. Kind of like that idea. I want to be able to have the knowledge to be able to have the knowledge to be able to build things that are useful to people. So I think that as the challenges arise, I'm learning something from the challenge, right? So I'm just essentially getting like knowledge and like skills and the things that are priceless, that could be used in later in life, that I don't know that I may not know if it's going to be useful, but I do know that the challenges that I face at the moment, whether it be like in classes or just like the small things that are immediate, I think that's what kind of keeps me going, because I know, okay, the challenge that I know that the next challenge that I face is going to be useful maybe like 5 years from now. Like the skill that I learn, or the mentality that I then learn from that, to then be able to build stuff to help people, because that's kind of like my end goal, right? So.
Perfect. So I'll open up the chat to some questions that folks may have for Xavier. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat. Hopefully, folks have at least one question that they can ask you. And we'll wait for those to come in to the chat. I'll ask you a question. What do you do in terms of hobbies? Like, how are you connected in non-academic things during your time here at MIT?
Uh, I think I'm a good example of this at this point in my life now, because I guess the way things have worked out since I've got here, like I ended up have made a good amount of friends, where I have to often say no more than I say yes, to things. So I'm connected with people like, okay, well, we might go out and like go get food. There's a lot of good food places in Boston and stuff that I do. I mean, I guess in terms of hobbies, at least we go out and get food. That's kind of like the culture here also a little bit. Um, let's see. We play like sports sometimes when it's warm. My friends and I, soccer, basketball. My roommates and I love hosting people, so we might we had like game night the other day, like we had people over just like watching movies or something like that. You know, that kind of thing, just hanging out with my friends. So I think I'm probably a good example of that. It just uh so yeah.
Perfect. So we have a question in the chat. The person apologizes for joining late, but they thank you first for sharing your experience, but what are your career goals after finishing your PhD? So I know you touched a little bit on that. So do you mind just talking a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess career goals would be probably I guess I would want to develop or own a company at least, or start a company or be involved in some sort of development of medical imaging technology. I think that's where I'm focused on. But the idea is I want to start a company that builds things can be implemented in people's lives today. So whatever that is for me at the moment, I just happen to be on a project where I'm working on what I'm working on. But um, whatever that looks like for me, I'm more focused in the biomedical engineering area. So because I'm still pretty new in my PhD, or early in my PhD, still trying to figure out exactly what that is. But that's how I know what I want to do, at least career-wise, to do that. So
Perfect.
um,
Another question, what was the most challenging part in completing your graduate school application?
I'd probably say writing the or answering the questions in the essays, I feel like was probably the hardest part because I have to answer honestly, and I also have to kind of like again go back mentally and think about like how did I feel at that time, even if it was like 2 years ago, right? So I think that was probably the hardest part because um doing that in school at the same time was not easy. And um yeah, I would do my best because the program that I was in, like we had earlier deadlines than the actual graduate school application. So I had to start essentially yeah, like almost like a month and a half earlier, which still did me good, but I think that was the challenging part. I'm like I have to write down all of my experience in a limited amount of in a word limit um, and get it done earlier so that people can say, okay, you may need to change this whole thing to still kind of convey what I want to say to answer the questions. I think that was the hardest part.
Perfect. I'll invite our audience to give us any more questions they may have via the chat. Um, I see a question coming in. Well, yeah, one question. How did you learn about summer programs? You mentioned MSRP and a program at Berkeley. How did you learn about the whole concept of summer research and how do you go about applying for those summer research programs?
Yeah, yeah. So I again highlight the program that I was in, the MyHeart program and URI's program. That was the only reason why I heard about it. I actually joined the program specifically because I knew I wanted to get a PhD in the first place. You join when you get accepted to undergrad. So they had that whole thing figured out for us. So they were like, these are the places. I mean, it was a plethora of information. Like it was just like find one that you want to do your own research and then apply to it and then let us read your application, stuff like that. So I ended up finding that there were some research programs and I'm like, well, MIT is a cool place I would obviously want to go to because it has like, it's like one of the best institutions in the world. So like, why not like apply? But I saw some research there that I thought was interesting. So I think that's how I learned was in that program. They kind of just gave us the information, say, okay, these are the programs that do these types of things, and then based off of like the research that you might want to do and the your area in terms of like whether it be electrical engineering or biology or microbiome or other places, that's would have been like that's how I could select. But I didn't have to search at least, I'm blessed to be able to say I didn't have to do that at least. But yes.
And I'll just say for our attendees, if you were to search summer REUs, summer research programs, there are a ton of programs out there, both at sort of private industry, they have some, but also um, graduate schools usually have some. Individual departments have their own summer research programs. So you should look. And if you're a current undergraduate student, reaching out to folks in your department and or an honors program at your college may be a good place to start because you may also have research programs on your campus that are sort of uniquely designed for students from that institution. So research, ask around, there are tons of opportunities, waiting for students to raise their hands.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Xavier, if you had
Oh
something.
yeah. I was just gonna say like asking is probably just ask. I found that there were other people in at my university, like other programs that were not related to the one that I was in, that were doing the exact same thing, that were saying like, hey, we're here to help you guys get into research like experiences. Just ask the questions and people will lead you, because the people that are in those positions, like those coordinators at your schools, they would know of some of the top schools. It's just no different. Like I feel like if you just ask people, you'll find what you need. So
Perfect. And I'll say another thing that I've learned over the years that could be helpful is, in most cases, faculty members and or program directors in the programs you're involved in would know students from your institution who have gone on to PhD programs elsewhere. And that would be a good thing to do, is just setting up some informational interviews with PhD students, especially those who came from your institution. They can give you a sense of what you should be involved with the types of programs on campus that could be helpful, etc. So never discount just asking PhD students at your institution or others about their own trajectory. And that's why, we're essentially having MIT Mondays, right? To give that exposure for people who won't have doctoral students to ask the question, that they can hear from some MIT students. I'll make one last call for questions. If not, we can wrap up and I'll have just one ending question for you. Let's give 10 more seconds in case somebody's typing. All right, so Xavier, my last question for you is the PhD all it was hyped up to be? So you came in with one idea in your mind as to what it means to be a PhD student. Has the PhD lived up to the hype?
well, I would say preface to that would be, depends upon what people are hyping up about it, right? Because it depends. And then to follow that, it was hyped up to me that the PhD was like the best thing that you could do in terms of learning about yourself as a researcher, well, becoming a scientific researcher in general, becoming like an understudy of someone, and learning, like I mentioned, like the skills to be able to identify and solve a problem. And yes, the answer, at least to how it was hyped up to me, yes, it definitely was. And it definitely is. I feel like I have a mixture of, I feel like I have the opportunity to take my time for the next almost a little bit more than half a decade, to learn how to do what I love to do, and I get paid to do it. And I also get paid to learn, like take the classes to learn some of the more advanced materials. And the structure helps with that, right? Being in school with, like, your deadlines and whatnot, like that actually does help. I think that it actually is, because I have an idea, I have an image in my head, at least when I graduate, I have the knowledge, again, the knowledge, the skills, the experiences to be able to identify another problem in the future that I would face, and then say, okay, I remember doing XYZ, right? And that means even like the technical skills, or that means the more like the soft skills, whether it be like interpersonal relationships, or just any other area, really. I feel like it really is hyped up to what it is. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Xavier, for joining us today. And thank you for our guests who have joined us live. And if you're watching the recording, look out for future MIT Mondays. You can sign up, pre-register for those and join us live, or continue to watch our recordings, which will continue to be on our website. So thank you all. And that's it for this edition of MIT Mondays. Thank you again, Xavier.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Thank you all.